Welcome back. All right, so earlier today I talked about Buffalo. Now we're going to talk about the Anaheim Ducks. As again, we're continuing to climb up the standings and getting closer and closer to teams that just missed the cutoff for the playoffs. And so we're going to talk about the Ducks. The Ducks finished the season 31, 37, and 14. 22 regulation wins for the Anaheim Ducks. And this is a team that it feels like kind of teased us a little bit during the season with the idea that maybe they were going to make it back to the playoffs. There were points during this season where it looked like Anaheim, San Jose, and LA could all end up pushing for playoff spots. And of course, by season's end, LA's in, Anaheim and San Jose are out. But it doesn't feel like Anaheim's that far off. I get the same feeling with Anaheim right now that I had with the Kings last year. That if not for some things that took place this season, that things have fallen just a little differently. Maybe they're in the hunt a little longer. But it is interesting to see how their season kind of fell off after what was a very encouraging start. And so I want to talk about the stats here first. Goals for, 228, they were 24th. Now, off to the good start they had, their offense was very good. So towards the end, their offensive numbers take an absolute nosedive, which is kind of by design because at the deadline, of course, they sold off, especially on the blue line. Goals against, 263. They were 23rd in that regard. So again, their numbers started the season pretty well. Ends up falling off by the end of the year. But I think there's a lot to build on here if you're the Ducks for next season. Their power play was excellent to start the year. So it finished the season at 21.9%, which was 14th, which is actually a drop from where it was. Their power play was the worst in the history of the National Hockey League for 2020-2021. For this season, that's not a discussion. So it got a lot better, which was necessary because last year's power play was absolutely ridiculously bad. Their penalty kill, 80.8%, was actually 10th. So their special teams numbers add up to 102.7%. So that's good. That's above average. And so while the goals for and goals against, below average there, their special teams were good, there are reasons to believe this team could turn things around. When we knew this team would miss the playoffs, they lost 9 out of 11 games from December 17th to January 19th. Now, they had also played a lot more games than teams that were chasing them. So when I was looking at the overall standings, I was looking at points percentage. I knew that it was going to be a challenge for the Ducks to get in. That while they were getting the points, and points-wise they were in a playoff spot, the points percentage wasn't as strong as you'd want it to be for them to stay there. So in the end, other teams end up playing those games they had in hand, got enough points to drop them down, and then brand new GM Pat Verbeek said, all right, well, we're outside the playoffs, we're sellers. And so when he was hired on February 3rd, it felt like that changed things, that he sat down and said, yep, I understand what we're in here, we're in the middle of a rebuild, but at least he didn't say we're starting a rebuild, he didn't say we're starting fresh, I'm ready to just wipe everything out. I think he understands there's a lot of good young players here, and I was always a big fan of Pat Verbeek's. There's a video on his career on the channel. I put him in the THG Hall of Fame, which is just symbolic, of course. Haven't built that. But the fact that Pat Verbeek's hired as GM, I think, speaks well. If he's as smart as a general manager as he was as a player, you're in good hands in Anaheim. So they started the season 3-4-3 in October, which, while that's not great, I think it was probably a little bit better than some may have been expecting. I figured Anaheim could very well be one of the worst teams in the West. I had Arizona at the worst, and Anaheim just above them and in around that same area. So they don't end up there. November, they were 9-4. They had a really good month in November. And again, their special teams were fueling a lot of those wins. December, not awful, 5-2-4. So they don't win half of their games, but they only lost 2 in regulation. So there's still reason to be happy, right? They're 14-6-4 from November to December. But 6-6-2 in January. And of course, there's the 9 losses in 11 that take place during that period. And then in February, they were 2-5. March, they're 2-9-3. And in April, 4-7-2. And a lot of that being after they sell off pretty major assets from the team. Moving on from Hampus Lindholm, I think was the right call. I also think it was a very courageous call on their part. For the Anaheim Ducks, I do think the worst of it is behind them. I do. I think that we're going to see a team that next year ends up at least 500, probably above 500, which doesn't necessarily get you into the playoffs because NHL 500 is a little different than in other sports. But that progression I do expect to still be there. The one question mark I have, he's not on the board, is John Gibson. John Gibson has been very visually, obviously frustrated with things at times. he has been very vocal as well about things at times. And I do wonder how much longer his patience holds out in Anaheim. Again, it's one of those things. You can see that body language. You can feel that he's not happy with how things are going, which is good. That there's that fine line there, right? You don't want to have players on your team that just accept losing and just shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's part of the game. We'll get them next time. It's no big deal. You want guys who are mad, that don't like losing, that think it sucks. There's nothing more frustrating than when you're watching a team that's losing games and there's no reaction. And like I said, and then the post-game interviews, they'll be like, no, we think we did some good things. If we keep doing it, we'll turn it around. It can be really frustrating. So having a player who is willing to say, I don't think this is acceptable and I don't appreciate the losing, that's important. That's absolutely important. So we'll see how that energy's channeled going forward, because John Gibson is one of the most underrated goalies. I'll say underrated right now. I do think at times he's been a little overrated, but right now I'd say he's underrated because I really don't hear discussions of him now when they talk about some of the better goalies in the league. Your top producers, Troy Terry reached that next level this year. So in the first video I did today, I talked about Tage Thompson. Thompson and Terry, it's a very similar dynamic and very similar numbers. 75 games, 37 goals, 30 assists, 67 points. Terry's production, not as strong in the second half as the first, because almost none of the Anaheim Ducks end up playing as well in the second half as in the first. And again, part of that's by design of the moves made at the deadline. But Terry showed he's a pretty darn good forward, and he's a guy they can trust going forward as well. Trevor Zegras, 75 games, 23 goals, 38 assists, 61 points. He could end up winning the Calder, and of course, he has highlight reel goals. He's also pretty good at both ends of the ice. He's honestly a pretty strong player. I do like the odds of him becoming one of the better young forwards in the game as soon as next year. I think he'll end up being a point-per-game player at the very least. I think that he's the one that should normalize the lacrosse goal. And what we'll see with the lacrosse goal is not only it being far more common, but teams having the ability to defend it a lot better than what they do now. Right now it has the surprise aspect, but we're already starting to see teams kind of anticipating it and what might be coming. So I think he's helping to kind of change the way that some of the game is played. Henrique, 58 games, 19 goals, 23 assists, 42 points. Henrique, when he's in the lineup, solid player. I would expect him to probably be back next year. Cam Fowler, 76 games, 9 goals, 33 assists, 42 points. I like Fowler. Could he get more points? Probably, but I do like Fowler. I think he's a good defenseman. And of course, the retiring Ryan Getzlaf, who played 56 games this year, 3 goals, 34 assists, 37 points. And when the team was playing well, Getzlaf was a big part of that as well. One question mark, it's not here, but one question mark I have with them is, with Getzlaf gone, who is the next leader? Who's going to be the next guy? And I don't envy them, because the Anaheim Ducks, they may just have one Stanley Cup in their history, but when you look at the guys who've worn the C in Anaheim, it's a pretty big deal. There's some pretty big names there. So whoever takes over from Getzlaf, I would not be surprised. There's one of two ways they can go with this. They can name somebody immediately next season, or maybe you give it a year off. Maybe you name 4 alternate captains, and you rotate who's the alternate captains. Maybe you have different alternate captains on the road than at home. So you'd have 3 in one and 3 in the other, and just you'd have one that rotates in and out kind of thing. But replacing that leadership Getzlaf gave them is going to be difficult. Getzlaf was one of the best leaders in the National Hockey League. Then you look at their pending UFA list. It's not star-studded, but there's some interesting names. In that Aston Reese comes over at the deadline. I thought he played well. Did he play well enough that Pat Verbeek wants to bring him back next year, right? Same can be said of Mayhew, of Simone. Vinny Lettieri. Lettieri had a decent year when he was in the lineup for them, so I'd kind of be surprised if they don't bring him back on, obviously, a cheap enough deal. Schuster picked up on waivers. Pattern, also an expiring contract for them. Which of these players do they bring back? The one thing is, all of them are in your bottom 6 region, probably replaceable guys. I would be interested to see Aston Reese return, though. Aston Reese seemed to have good chemistry after getting to the Ducks, so we'll see if he gets an opportunity to return there next year. And then the question mark I have is, here's a team that doesn't have cap problems, a team that's tantalizingly close to being pretty good, in a division where, if you make the right improvements, they could be a playoff team next year. Do they go out and spend money in the free agent market? Do they spend it wisely? Do they spend it like? And here's the thing with the free agent market: I'm always more impressed by teams that go out and spend $2 million a piece on 3 different guys than a team that spends $8 million on one guy, because I think it puts a lot of pressure on that one guy, and sometimes the team is more than one guy away from turning it around. So if they spend their money wisely in the free agent market, they could build up a pretty good team. Stolars, I thought, played well as their backup as well. So I think their goaltending is sound. I think that their attack is better than the goals for would tell you. And I think that while they tailed off at the end of the year, if they can maintain a good start next season, we could be looking at a playoff team. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.